Trump's Department of Justice is moving. Pam Bondi is moving. And Tennessee is moving in the opposite direction. Every step, every legal filing, every press statement signals a broader struggle that could redefine what it means to exercise Second Amendment rights in America today. This is not speculation. This is happening now, and its impact will be felt in ways that go far beyond headlines. The stakes are clear, the players are significant, and the law itself is the battleground. Pause. Understanding this moment requires looking at the facts clearly, without hype, and following the legal and historical context that has brought the United States to this point. If you want to track these developments accurately and understand how they affect your rights and responsibilities, stay with me. Subscribe and follow for updates that are rooted in fact and careful analysis. Knowledge here is power, because what happens in courts today shapes daily life tomorrow. Pause. The Second Amendment, once a theoretical debate for decades, is now actively being interpreted in ways that expand individual rights while challenging local regulatory authority. For much of the 20th century, discussions around guns were framed in terms of public safety and state authority. Cities and states created gun-free zones in public spaces, parks, and schools, and courts largely deferred to these policies. Yet the Supreme Court's decision in District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008 fundamentally altered the landscape, affirming that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to possess firearms for lawful purposes, such as self-defense within the home. This interpretation was reinforced in McDonald versus Chicago, which incorporated the Second Amendment against the states, and more recently in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, which shifted the analysis toward historical tradition as the standard for evaluating gun regulation. The question today is not whether Americans have the right to bear arms, but how that right is applied in various locations and under what constraints. The Trump Department of Justice, in alignment with Pam Bondi's legal guidance and strategic input, has taken a clear position. Second Amendment protections should extend broadly, limiting the ability of states and localities to impose arbitrary location-based restrictions. Their argument relies on both historical precedent and strict constitutional interpretation. This is a legal philosophy that values clarity and consistency over temporary policy preferences. Bondi's involvement signals that this is a coordinated effort, not a political footnote. Her role is to craft arguments, guide filings, and ensure that the federal government's stance is coherent, legally sound, and persuasive. For observers, her participation indicates a level of commitment that suggests these efforts will shape future case law, rather than merely influence short-term politics. Meanwhile, Tennessee has filed legal briefs aiming to preserve the ability to keep parks gun-free. Their position is framed as a safety concern, emphasizing the protection of children, families, and public gatherings. They argue that public spaces, unlike private property, present unique risks that justify targeted restrictions. From a legal perspective, Tennessee's filings highlight the tension between state authority and federal constitutional protections. This conflict is central to understanding the evolving balance between rights and regulatory power. It is not simply a matter of opinion. It is a deliberate testing of legal boundaries that will likely be cited in courts nationwide. To understand the implications, consider the practical reality. A law-abiding citizen who carries a firearm for self-defense could face legal consequences depending on whether they enter a state park in Tennessee. One interpretation of the law might consider the individual fully protected under the Second Amendment, while the other might subject the same person to penalties for violating a localized restriction. This is more than theory. It affects daily life, public policy, and law enforcement behavior. The enforcement patterns will adapt depending on which legal precedent prevails, shaping not only where guns can be carried, but how authorities respond to law-abiding gun owners across the country. Historically, gun restrictions in the United States were very specific and context-dependent. The founding era did not include broad, generalized bans on carrying firearms in communal spaces. Restrictions existed, but they were tied to clearly defined risks, such as government buildings, jails, and other sensitive locations, The modern concept of gun-free zones in parks, schools, and public facilities largely emerged in the mid-20th century as urban policy evolved to address concerns about crime and public safety. The current legal analysis asks whether these modern policies align with the historical understanding of the Second Amendment. The Department of Justice's approach underlines that, unless there is a historically consistent justification, restrictions must be narrowly applied. The conflict between the Trump DOJ and Tennessee is also a story about power dynamics. On one side, the federal government is asserting a nationwide interpretation of constitutional rights, using both legal argumentation and strategic influence. On the other side, states are asserting the principle of localized governance, emphasizing their responsibility to maintain public order and safety. These forces are not evenly matched in terms of visibility or political influence. Federal interpretation carries the weight of the Constitution and the authority of the Department of Justice. State-level challenges rely on local courts and the persuasive power of historical precedent, highlighting the complexity of federalism in America. Real-life examples illustrate the stakes clearly. Imagine a small-town family that enjoys recreational activities in a state park. They are law-abiding, trained, and responsible gun owners. Under a broad federal interpretation, their right to carry is protected in these spaces. Under Tennessee's restrictive interpretation, entering a park could suddenly expose them to legal liability. This scenario underscores how the conflict is not hypothetical. It directly affects the ability of Americans to exercise rights responsibly, and it demonstrates the nuanced balance courts must navigate between individual liberties and collective safety. Legal arguments in this space often encounter myths and misunderstandings. One common misconception is that a broader Second Amendment interpretation equates to guns everywhere. This is inaccurate. Even the DOJ's approach recognizes that certain locations, such as courthouses, prisons, and military installations, remain sensitive and can be legitimately restricted. Another myth is that state authority is entirely overridden. States retain regulatory powers, but they must now justify restrictions within a stricter constitutional framework. Finally, some suggest that these developments are purely political. While politics may influence the actors involved, the decisions are ultimately grounded in legal reasoning, historical interpretation, and judicial precedent. The historical dimension provides context for why these arguments matter. Early American society permitted firearms widely, but with context-specific limitations. The Supreme Court's contemporary focus on historical tradition reflects this reality, requiring courts to analyze whether restrictions align with practices and understanding from the founding era. Modern expansions of gun-free zones challenge this historical consistency, making current cases, like Tennessee's, central to defining the boundaries of constitutional rights. The DOJ and Bondi's strategic approach reflects an understanding that constitutional interpretation must be both principled and forward-looking, balancing tradition with contemporary realities. Current implications are immediate. Expect continued litigation, evolving legal briefs, and active federal involvement. The DOJ is likely to pursue cases that establish nationwide precedent, emphasizing the broad applicability of Second Amendment protections. States, in contrast, will continue defending localized restrictions, focusing on safety, public policy, and the traditional deference granted to state governance. These opposing trajectories will define both enforcement practices and judicial reasoning in the coming years, shaping the lived experience of rights across multiple jurisdictions. Looking further ahead, the consequences extend well beyond parks. The legal principles established in these cases will influence public spaces, transportation systems, educational environments, and municipal planning. Law enforcement agencies will adjust operational procedures to align with new interpretations. Judges will have a framework for evaluating similar cases across other states. Citizens, in turn, will make decisions informed by clearer legal standards. What seems abstract in court filings will become tangible in daily routines, public safety protocols, and civic expectations. This moment is a structural one. It is not about political slogans or media sensationalism. It is about defining the boundaries of constitutional rights in a way that is both consistent and enforceable. The interaction between the Trump DOJ's expansive interpretation and Tennessee's restrictive filings represents a collision of legal philosophies, one rooted in historical and constitutional fidelity, the other grounded in public safety and local governance. Both positions are legitimate within their own frameworks, yet the outcome will have far-reaching effects on citizens, law enforcement, and policymakers alike. Pam Bondi's role cannot be overstated. Her experience, strategic insight, and legal acumen provide the DOJ with a precise and persuasive voice. Her involvement elevates the effort beyond routine legal argumentation, signaling a deliberate and methodical approach to constitutional enforcement. Observers should note that this is not symbolic participation. This is active, strategic legal leadership with tangible consequences for national policy. Meanwhile, Tennessee's efforts underscore a critical aspect of federalism. States retain the ability to craft regulations that address local conditions, population density, and community safety concerns. The tension between federal constitutional interpretation and state-specific safety measures is the essence of American governance. Cases like these test the boundaries of authority and demonstrate the delicate balance between national rights and local responsibility. Public engagement is also part of the story. Citizens, advocacy groups, and legal experts are watching these developments closely. Law-abiding gun owners, educators, parents, and park administrators all have a stake in the outcome. Their perspectives, experiences, and testimonies inform the broader debate and provide courts with context for evaluating practical consequences alongside theoretical rights. The courts themselves are evolving in their analysis. Post-Bruin, judges are increasingly required to weigh historical evidence and constitutional fidelity over contemporary policy convenience. This approach changes how restrictions are evaluated, making historical scholarship and legal precedent central to decision-making. The DOJ and Bondi are leveraging this requirement, constructing arguments that align with both historical understanding and modern constitutional principles. Ultimately, this legal struggle will determine more than where guns can be carried. It will influence the principle of constitutional clarity, the predictability of enforcement, and the balance between federal and state authority. The resolution will shape policy debates, civic planning, and public safety discussions for decades. Understanding these developments is essential for any citizen interested in the intersection of law, governance, and individual rights. In summary, the Trump DOJ and Pam Bondi's actions represent a calculated effort to broaden Second Amendment protections. Tennessee's legal filings are a counterpoint, seeking to preserve public safety within localized contexts. The resulting legal conflict is both inevitable and instructive. It illustrates the complexity of constitutional interpretation, the importance of historical precedent, and the practical impact of legal decisions on daily life. For citizens, policymakers, and observers, paying attention to this case is critical. It is more than a news story. It is a blueprint for the future of rights, regulation, and governance in America. Pause. If you want to understand these developments as they unfold, follow the channel and stay informed. Knowledge is the key to navigating change, understanding legal authority, and making informed decisions in a society where constitutional rights and public safety coexist. This is the moment to observe, learn, and prepare. The rules are being written now, and their effects will last far into the future.